5 factors make Asia highly vulnerable to natural disasters: geography, geology, climate extremes, which are not new, but traditional in nature, human-induced environmental change, and climate change. This map shows the relative vulnerability of different regions in the world to droughts, cyclones, and floods. In terms of the number of people exposed, Asia is at the center of the global hotspots. The geographical vulnerability of Asia is compounded by 2 factors. 1, Asia's high population density in low-lying areas. And 2, Asia's vast coastlines, which are the world's largest. As for geology, this region tectonically constitutes one of the world's most complex and vulnerable zones. Interactions of local tectonics makes Asia a region prone to earthquakes, cyclones, and tsunamis. Climate extremes in Asia are characterized by too much water, or too little water, or too dirty water. Unlike, say, Europe, which gets rain almost throughout the year, large parts of Asia get most of their yearly rain in a concentrated 3 to 4 month monsoon period. Flooding is endemic in this season, but a bigger problem is posed by drought, as we have seen in some parts of Asia this year. This map shows global drought risk hotspots. In terms of number of people at risk, drought risks are the highest in Asia. Environmental change is caused by human factors such as reckless land use, degradation, depletion or contamination of water resources, environmentally unsustainable irrigation. Coastal erosion has emerged as a serious problem in some zones in Asia, in part because of clearing of coastal forests. Climate science is a young science. It's a work in progress. There are gaps in our scientific understanding of the phenomenon of global warming. Yet, whatever we know should be a matter of concern, especially in this part of the world. It's become necessary for states to strategically invest in ecological restoration, build institutional and organizational capacity to deal with environmental stresses and to manage the greater vulnerability to natural disasters. Building resilience is at the core of the challenge that we face on the natural hazard and global warming fronts.
Long before climate change, we have known that human activities, development activities and so on, cause environmental damage, which also interacts with disasters. So the link between human activity and disasters is well established, and in turn, the disasters affect human development. The poor countries and the poorest groups are the ones who will suffer most, which is manifestly unfair because they had the least to do with creating the problem. We try not necessarily to address climate issues by themselves, but as an integrated strategy as a part of sustainable development policy, so that by bending the curve of development, we can address not only climate, but also other pressing development issues. Talking about climate change in isolation is not getting much attention. Smuggling in the climate policies through the development agenda perhaps shows greater promise. If you look at the ecological footprint of humanity, which is a measure of the total natural resource burden we impose on the planet, we are already consuming 50% more than the planet can sustainably yield. In a few years, we'll be consuming the equivalent of 2 planets Earth. If you look at how this consumption is distributed, you have the famous champagne glass, where 83% of the consumption is done by the 1.4 billion people who are the most wealthy. and the poor consume hardly anything. Now, let me suggest to you a way to move forward. If you look at this diagram, I've plotted using climate as a metaphor, per capita greenhouse gas emissions on the vertical axis, per capita income on the horizontal axis. So if you're a rich country, you're at point C, you're above the safe limit for emissions, but you're also rich and relatively protected. Poor countries are at point A, low emissions, low income. And many countries are at point B. So what we need is for the rich, and this was recognized in the Climate Convention and the Kyoto Protocol, the transformation, decarbonization to reduce the burden on the planet, but not necessarily to give up the good life. Those who are aspiring to improve their economic position need to find a more sustainable path. Getting to E will need major efforts in learning and innovation. The consumption of the rich should not crowd out the development prospects of the poor. The way to address disasters, climate, is to fold it into a sustainable development strategy, and that also makes political sense today.
It is a must that development policy should promote effective disaster risk reduction towards sustainable and resilient growth. It should be mainstreamed in every aspect of nation building. Disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and mitigation must be present in all institutions and agencies of government, not just of vulnerable nations like the Philippines, but of the whole world. Here in the Philippines, our laws are unequivocal in mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in development plans, programs, and budgets at the national and local levels. Even our budget policies reflect strengthened DRR and management efforts. Aside from increased allocation for DRR investments in the national budget, what was then called the Calamity Fund, intended for post-disaster activities, has been renamed the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund and can now be used for disaster preparedness and disaster mitigation programs. Laws, however, as I mentioned, are just part of the equation, and their implementation through good governance could spell the major difference. Solutions for climate and resource risks entail investing in water supply, in sanitation, in flood control, in transport, in roads, in social and health services, even education and energy infrastructure that build resilience to climate variability. In the case of Pakistan, for example, if I may, the JICA has calculated that if DRR investment is ensured, approximately 25% more economic growth is projected for the year 2042 compared to the case without DRR investment. And I believe that holds true for countries like the Philippines as well. We need, therefore, to promote a new approach in dealing with climate change and disaster risk that would not only protect our environment, but would also reap development benefits. In essence, my simple message is building resilience should be everybody's attitude, and building resilience should be everybody's business. With this kind of mindset, we can promote the scaling up of existing government programs to rectify the social and economic structures that breed disaster risk and trap the poor in the vicious cycle of risk and poverty. The private sector will likewise be encouraged to put disaster resilience at the core of their business strategies and to promote green policies. The heightened engagement of the business sector in DRR is crucial in preventing substantial losses and economic development setbacks resulting from disasters of unprecedented scale.
Hazards will come, but hazards, well, need not be disasters. It is the human factor that makes disasters out of hazards. And therefore, I'd like to look at the human factor here. We need to strengthen governance and leadership. Leaders do make a big difference. We need our leaders to take care of the commons. Our commons is anything we need to share. We have to share things. We cannot parcel things into little, pockets of private property. When we are stewards of the commons, this is basically our land, our energy, our food and water lifelines, we need to define accountabilities, the ambit of regulation. We need to develop supply reserves, logistics, mobility, infrastructure, effective warning systems. We need our leaders to integrate and network our communities, even our cultures. We are still very much an archipelago, an island. As you know, isolation compounds vulnerability. And I do not mean just physical bridges, but social and economic bridges. We have to rationalize urbanization. Manila, as a mega city, is just developing incrementally, and we're not developing other cities. How can we even build bridges to other points when we are just building this city and making it larger? Okay. We should improve education and research. Education and research by doing many things, strengthening first the science to understand causality. To model the future, we need pictures. Even pictures of the present and in the past, but more of the future. Business as usual or an alternative future. We need culture and the arts to recover the human, our humanity, to recover balance, beauty. Interestingly, I've been talking about climate change since the 1990s. It took Al Gore and media and the human to actually stimulate action. We need management, good management, finance, social sciences for effective, efficient execution. We need interdisciplinary approaches. So wicked problems are intractable, multi-generational, multi-layer, multi-sectoral problems. Very difficult to solve. You need to bring many minds together. Lastly, values formation still. The value of the commons. Hard to monetize that. What is the value of a park, of open space, of a road? If you put that in your balance sheet, what does it cost? The sense of nation, a sense of world. These are things that we need to cultivate.
How do you make developing countries or poorer countries go into renewable energy when it is far more expensive than something like coal?
Environmental and social impacts are not properly factored into the cost structure.
Yeah.
So when you say coal is cheap,
Cheaper.
it means
And
that
faster to build.
the costs of coal, the true costs of coal, are not properly factored in. If you include the health costs of air pollution plus climate and other damage, then the cost of coal should be significantly higher. And as long as those environmental externalities are hidden and not included in the market pricing system, then you will have the bias for fossil fuels.
The human population is 7.2 billion today.
Yeah.
The most conservative estimate of the global livestock population is more than 150 billion. The direct ecological footprint of the livestock population is much larger than the human population, even though we human beings are rearing these animals for food. Yeah. Increase in meat consumption is leading to increase in human disease. Exactly. It's not about taxes, it's about healthy living. Okay. Eating a healthier life is environmentally friendly. It's also better for human health.
Yeah.
So just the way we have been launching and sustaining an anti-smoking campaign in the world, governments, civil society, institutions and groups need to make people aware at the grassroots that healthy living means eating healthy diet, which means eating less meat, which in turn will take the pressure off our environment. The last century was the fastest century in human history in terms of economic growth. It also inflicted the most rapid damage on our ecosystems.
Yeah. In
the 20th century, we degraded at least 50% of our surface land. We drove 1/4 of all bird species and many large mammal species to extinction. The reason why we have been at it, damaging our ecosystem, is that because we have defined economic development in a distorted way. This is at the root of the problem that we face. We have defined economic growth as ever-increasing production and consumption. Economic development is a broad-based concept. It includes far more than GDP growth. It includes protection of biological and physical environment, low income disparity, social equity, environmental protection. But we have, across the world, defined development as GDP growth.
My university is embarking on sustainability reporting. We do these balance sheet reports, right, every year. So sustainability reporting, there is a global initiative actually on this, and we're hoping that companies, communities can embark on first measuring, trying to measure. I'm sure it will be rough at first, but that's one way to actually do a more integrated accounting of our assets and liabilities and equity.
It is not enough that I say that I've done my part as a lawmaker and my laws are in place. While yes, we thank international bodies like the United Nations, ISDR, for saying that indeed we have the best laws in the world. Best laws cannot save lives, cannot save livelihoods, cannot change the negative or adverse impacts of extreme weather events. We have to make sure we compel the national agencies in charge and the local governments who are implementers of our laws to actually implement it.
I recently, 2 months ago, visited Zamboanga and
Zamboanga,
area. And I think it may be partly due to this, solid waste management. I work on agrarian reform community projects.
Okay.
10 years ago, and now, I revisited the area, and the marked difference that I saw is that the recycle of waste, especially I think a lot of LGU are doing biofertilizer and returning organic matters into the soil. So Philippines is actually doing something that other countries would like to learn from.
But this kind of initiative is exactly what I meant when I said that you integrate climate actions into the normal development policy, because whatever you do in land use, better agricultural practices, it's also benefiting the local environment and the local society. So it's a win-win outcome.
In Zamboanga, Sibugay, it's a group of communities we work with, and they took out the mangroves. And so when they took out the mangroves, the fish disappeared. They suffered. Then we said, let's plant mangroves, and the fish came back. Lapu-lapu, and then they saw, and then they saw and they learned, and now they protect. I think that's one way to empower and to enable action, is to show people a different picture.
We cannot wait for governments and the international system and world leaders to solve these problems, because everything is in gridlock. I think we have to start at a very grassroots level, the kind of point that was mentioned earlier about waste management or some agricultural practice, and start building up best practice at the ground level.
Building resilience is an attitude and a paradigm shift in the way we think, the way we live, and the way we consume things is in order. And if only every barangay, which is the smallest political unit in our country, would be responsible for its rivers and its lakes and the utilization of its meager, finite resources would be done, then that sense of stewardship and accountability will be able to save us from the negative impacts of extreme weather events and our over-consumptive way of living.
We are still hooked on the fact that more consumption means you must be happier. And that is an obvious fallacy. And I think the point I want to make here is values are very important.
Yes.
If we teach children from the earliest age that the objective in life is to become more rich and consume more, and therefore you will be happy, then you're going to have the kind of world that we have now. Innovation is a very important key, coming back to this. We have to learn from the lessons of history. condemned to repeat it. But I ask the question, innovate what? Because criminals are innovating how to steal better. Arms manufacturers are innovating how to make weapons that will kill people better. That's not the kind of innovation we want. So we have to have values, okay? Start with values from the kindergarten, because unless the values of human beings change, we cannot alter the direction of progress. People will keep going, and however many laws you pass, they will never get implemented. How many incentives you provide. So I come back to the point that we have to start with values. But meanwhile, while we are changing the values in schools and educational systems, there are other things we can do. We can use the pricing system and laws and regulations. But that's only to start the transition. Value change is what will finally get us there. Thank you very much.